This is Charlotte Curtis, Head of Adult Services with your Livingston Parish Library, with a special edition of Comicpalooza. We're very honored today to have Professor Stephen Andes of LSU's History Department, who's going to be talking with us about one of his most recent books, Zorro's Shadow, how a Mexican legend became America's first superhero. Because you can't have Comicpalooza or Comic Con or anything like that without superheroes, right? So I was very, very interested to find out that while you are a history professor, and I looked up all of your books, I see that you also specialize in pop culture. Can you explain to the people watching what pop culture is, since Comicpalooza, Comic Con is kind of a celebration of all things pop culture?
Yeah. So, I mean, everything has a history. I mean, I think that's what I try to tell my students. And so pop culture, sort of the sort of, what oftentimes happen is there's a definition of high culture and low culture, right? All that kind of stuff. And, high culture being sort of associated with certain classical forms of art, whether music or dance or et cetera and so forth. And then quote unquote low culture, right? The culture of the people. And all of those distinctions are kind of, I think, somewhat irrelevant these days, especially because of how media has made all of that available to all people at all times, right? You can see the art of Picasso, or you can see a movie by the Three Stooges, right, on the internet at this, sort of in subsequent fashion. And so pop culture is just the study of the forms of creation and consumption of everyday people. And to study the history of that, I think tells us a lot about who we are and who we want to be, and what we aspire to do and what we don't do, right? And so I think pop culture really reflects a lot of our sort of everyday ideas and identities about ourselves in our world.
Okay, so pop culture is for the people, for the masses, for popular.
Yeah.
As opposed to say opera. It's the difference in country western and opera, even though the content of both is the same.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's a sense of, kind of, I think through history, a sort of an elite way in which, because of money or status, that certain forms of art have been less accessible to a certain group of people within society. I think those are less so now. But so pop culture are really kind of the sensibilities of everyday people, not necessarily associated with a specific privileged elite,
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. So what is your argument for making Zorro the first? It's a two-part question. First, what's a superhero? And the second part of that is, and why is Zorro America's first superhero, even though he comes from Mexico?
Right. This is all good questions. Sort of in terms of what makes a superhero, I think, yes, definitely, super heroic, sort of supernatural powers are oftentimes associated with that. But not always, right? You look at Batman, right? Batman is considered a superhero, but he's just sort of has a cool suit and sort of a lot of desire to sort of help the hapless people of Gotham. But for me, what makes Zorro America's first superhero is the sense that a full 20 years before Batman and Superman appeared on the scene, Zorro sort of began to set the blueprint for the tropes of the superhero, the costume, the mask, the alter ego, the sidekick, the secret lair, all of these kind of things. This superhero kind of tool or sort of utility belt began to be assembled 20 years before, and Zorro was one of the first people that set that in motion.
His whip, of course.
Right, his whip. Yeah.
That's great. Okay.
Yeah, there was those, exactly, the Batarang, I think maybe it's called, or something like that. So yeah, I mean, those things bled into that, but the creators of Batman and Superman were people that were influenced by Zorro, an earlier, action adventure hero that they saw on the screen, the silver screen. The medium of silent film in the 1920s was such that heroes had been around in literature, right? There was the Three Musketeers and the different romantic swashbuckling novels, etc. But now those kind of ideas were then linked to visual images that were automatically bigger and more exciting and more explosive than anything that people had experienced before. And so that effective aesthetic imagery, that medium, I think did a lot in building up Zorro as this kind of hero that was bigger, stronger, faster than other kind of heroes that had been before.
That's a good point. And you mentioned the Waverly novels, the Scarlet Pimpernel, but of course, people who couldn't read couldn't participate in any of that. And once movies came along, then those ideas became accessible to a wide population of people.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. Yeah.
So a superhero then, superpowers, a costume, a mask. So
usually some sort of, hiding their identity from the world, oftentimes in pursuit of other kinds of priorities or attachments that they have, right? Whether they want to protect the people they love, right? Because if such and such or mastermind criminal knew that they were really Bruce Wayne or such, that then the people that they love and cared about would be, in danger. Exactly. Yeah. Right. And the sort of Mexican identity of Zorro is something that I thought was important because, this project really came out of a context in which, politically speaking, there was a lot of rhetoric about Mexican immigration, right? As though Mexican Americans and Mexican people were, are not sort of natural or a natural aspect of what makes America America, right? And so this was my sort of response to say, hey, hold on. Actually, if we look at the history, Mexico and Mexican people have been part of this country from the beginning. And here's even one of the first people that we can point to, this first character in pop culture that lays the blueprint for America's first superheroes. Then, Mexican American experience and history is part and parcel of of American experience, just as much as the superhero itself, right? And so I think that was part of the sort of aha moment that I had in studying Zorro, was recognizing the way in which diversity and American culture and that sort of identity being there from the beginning as playing such a huge role in building what is today a very sort of central idea of American pop culture, American superheroes, right? And whatever that might mean and how that changes over time.
So I'm glad you mentioned Mexico, because something that I found fascinating about your book was you talk about a quest that you went on because you wanted to go all the way back to Mexico to trace the variants and see if you could find out who was the genesis, who was the generator of the Zorro character. And what just flabbergasted me was when you were in Mexico City and went to the big Victory Monument, and you make you raised the argument that some people claim that the first Zorro was in fact an Irishman.
Right. Yeah. This guy, William Lamport, who was this sort of Irish, Spanish adventurer who left Ireland because he was Catholic. And at the time, England was Protestant in the main, and went to Spain, and then from Spain came to colonial Mexico. And then he sort of ran afoul of the Mexican Inquisition and was imprisoned and was called a heretic, and then even claimed to sort of have a noble lineage himself, and declared the independence of Mexico from Spain, right? And then he was eventually put to death,
rather gruesomely.
Right. Sort of tied up and burned at the stake, kind of thing. Yeah.
So some people make that argument. Oh, well, he was really an Irishman. And I loved your detective work because you investigated that. And your ruling was, don't think it can be, because the information about him was all written in Spanish.
Right. Yes. And, by the time that Johnston McCauley, the guy who wrote the first Zorro story, came out in 1919, his sources would have been much more close at hand. And in California, there was already a legend around sort of a legendary bandit figure named Joaquin Murrieta that he would have been much more likely to be influenced by than a somewhat obscure sort of Irishman in Mexico who became important for Mexico later on, in sort of once they gained their independence, as this sort of guy that was sticking up for a Mexican independence before that was a thing. But really the fact of the matter is that he wouldn't have had the same kind of access to that as we do today. And that novel, on which some people say that William Lamport was romanticized in this novel, was written in Spanish, and it doesn't have an English translation even today. So yeah, it's kind of the Occam's razor, sort of given all sort of possibilities. Usually the easiest answer is probably more correct. And so that led me then to go to California, right? Once part of Mexico, in that era of the gold rush, when there was so much sort of racial violence between immigrants coming to the gold fields, and then sort of Anglo-Americans who also had their hands on trying to strike claims. And that's where Joaquin Murrieta and his legend was born.
I was struck with the similarities between Joaquin's legend and Robin Hood.
Yeah, no, definitely. And others as well. There was even a book written about Joaquin Murrieta called, The Robin Hood of El Dorado, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think, so there is a basic kind of, rob from the rich, give to the poor, the sort of noble bandit kind of trope within Western literature, within Western stories and stuff like that. But that gets a new twist with Joaquin Murrieta, because at first by the Anglo-Americans, he's seen as a villain, right? And the people that he is touted by are other Mexican immigrants or Mexican Americans within California. And then it's only over time, 50 years later or so, that pretty soon Joaquin Murrieta sort of becomes sort of a whiter, he becomes more aristocratic, more privileged in his standing, until finally in the years before Zorro is created, Joaquin Murrieta looks a whole lot like Zorro. He's sort of this noble bandit, oftentimes not fighting for Mexico or for Mexicans. He's fighting for the Americans against, right? Sometimes against Mexico, sometimes against indigenous people, right? And so Joaquin Murrieta becomes, or is sort of appropriated by Americans as their hero. And then the next step happens with the creation of Zorro.
And you mentioned specifically a pulp novelist, Johnston McCulley,
Yeah.
who figured out that he could make a lot of money
Yeah.
by churning out Zorro stories.
Yeah. Yeah. The guy was prolific. He probably wrote, at least 1,000 pulp stories over his career. And only, relatively speaking, a tiny fraction of those were actually Zorro stories, even though he's best known for Zorro today. But yeah, like he was an interesting dude because he was at the genesis of this notion of, like, he saw that there was something to this vigilante, right? A masked vigilante. So he did the Zorro thing, but then he also did other kind of vigilantes, masked heroes. And it's pretty clear that the sort of legends that he's drawing on take from Joaquin Murrieta, and sort of rearranged, mixed and matched over time, right? But yeah, Macaulay was of a generation of storytellers that, a generation or so later, that those were your comic book writers. Maybe a few years after that, or a generation or so after that, are starting to make superhero movies, right? These are entertainment. They have certain kind of formula to them. They're sort of incredibly fast and churned out and stuff like that. But that's the guy that originally popularized Zorro, was Johnston McCulley, a guy from Illinois,
And he was the inspiration for Douglas Fairbanks and Mary Pickford to make the first great Zorro movie, right?
Exactly.
But
Yeah.
by the way, I was very excited because if you want to see the 1920 version of Douglas Fairbanks and Zorro, if you've got a Livingston Parish Library card, we have it available in our Hoopla collection. So
cool.
You can watch that. You can also listen to audio versions of 7 of Johnston McCulley's pulp novels, as well as a book that I've heard great things about, an audio version of Zorro's Shadow, read by Robert Bass. And I listened to a little of it. It was really, really good. So many of the books that you used as sources, we do have available either as physical copies or digital through Hoopla. And I promise, sometimes I know people are a little nervous to try the digital version. I loved it. I've got it downloaded on my smartphone and my laptop, and I like to sit there and read. You mentioned also comic books. We also have issues 1 through 4 of Lady Zorro and Lady Rawhide, who are also mentioned in your book, and
Yes.
Zorro Rides Again. So those are all digital versions. If you want to see the Antonio Banderas movie that you've referenced in this interview, as well as in your book, we've got physical copies of that, as well as seasons 1 through 4 of A&E's series on Zorro. So if you're getting all inspired by watching this and you just need a little more Zorro, call your library, visit your library. We'd like to hook you up. So I'm sorry, I just got so excited.
No, that's great. I dig it. I love the Comicpalooza and what y'all are doing. And And I think there is a sense of when we're talking about that idea of, what is pop culture? I think, fortunately, over the last, I would say 20, 30 years, graphic novels, especially comic books, there was a sense of, oh, well, if you want a student to get into the real literature, you give them a graphic novel. But that sort of distinction has kind of been put aside now, where there's a sense of like, it's just a different medium, right? It's a different way in which stories are told. And so that graphic medium has wonderful things about it that just the printed word can't do, and things that the printed word does that the graphic novel doesn't do. So I love the way in which our libraries are beginning to support that notion of being valued in their own right as a literary form.
It's akin to what you're doing in your study of history and making it accessible by presenting it through the venue of pop culture. Libraries, yes, you're always going to have books. It's going to be our bread and butter. But it would be silly of us not to recognize that people prefer to access material in different ways.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And I'm certainly glad that we did have digital capabilities. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to be doing this right now. So, let me see. Why do you think Zorro is such a relatable figure? As you pointed out, it's been over 100 years and we're still churning out new versions of Zorro. So whether it's comic books or movies or music, whatever, what is it in him that speaks to something in us and makes us want to keep reading or keep listening to this character?
Yeah. I think they're and this might speak to the way in which Zorro and some of his DNA was fed into later superheroes too, that I think there is something about I guess I'm just going to speak for myself. I see that there's a way in which the best about Zorro is, he's a guy that, at least in a lot of the telling, is sort of born into some privilege, but yet there's a way in which his privilege is the thing that he leverages for seeking justice for others, right?
Yes.
And so I think there's that sense that I think within superhero, I think perhaps a later writer, said it best in Spider-Man, right? That with great power comes great responsibility. This notion of when we have been given so much, there's a need for us to care for other people. And I think, that's one of the myths or the ideas that we tell ourselves as Americans. I think that we want to look out for the person that is less fortunate. And so it's a continual reminder of us of some of our ideals, and even if we don't always live up to those ideals, even if we're trying to live up to those ideals and we fail, there is still a sense of our true identity is one that seeks justice for others, right? And despite what that and the consequences that might have for us individually or personally.
I like that. I think you're on to something there, or at least we're wired the same way. I like that he tries to help people. I like the fact that he hides his identity. He's not seeking recognition for what he's doing. And I totally agree that some of that is of a desire to protect others. I think some of it is because he wants the deed to be what's important, not himself, because he tries to get other people to join him in this quest, in this desire to help others, to lift everybody up, to serve. Almost the mask lets him stand in for everyone.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I just like it that the bad guy always gets it. So
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
appeals, I guess, to my innate sense of justice. So, well, I cannot tell you how much I appreciate your time today. And again, I want to urge everybody, contact your library, check out Zorro's Shadow. If you prefer to listen to it, you'll love listening to the audio version of it. By the way, did you get to pick who read the book?
No, they sent me Robert Fass's sort of demo, and I was like, oh man, this guy's great. So he's knows how to do it. It's such an art to learn how to read like that. And I mean, I've tried to read things before on audio, and it's difficult. So I was really pleased with how that turned out.
Yeah, I thought it was wonderful. So I read it first, and then I found, oh, we've got an audio version. So I thought, let me just hear what it sounds like, and he does you proud, I thought. So that was good. And of course, anybody watching that wants to see the granddaddy swashbuckler of them all, check out our 1920 version of the wait, I want to make sure I get it right. It was the Mask of Zorro.
The Mark.
The Mark, excuse me.
Yep.
The Mark of Zorro. Mask of Zorro and Legend of Zorro are the Antonio Banderas ones.
Exactly.
So we actually even have the double feature, so you can watch the Mark of Zorro and Don Q, Son of Zorro.
Yep.
So it's fun. So again, Charlotte Curtis, head of adult services with your Livingston Parish Library, expressing the gratitude of not only me, but I know everybody in Livingston Parish, to Professor Andes for being with us here today. Thanks again.
Hey, thank you so much.
Goodbye.